The silver cross glinted under the harsh courtroom lights as Karoline Leavitt stood defiant, her chin raised despite the tension crackling through the air. At 27, she was already a political force, the youngest White House press secretary in American history, and now, unexpectedly, the central figure in what would become the most explosive legal battle Washington had seen in decades. "Miss Leavitt, I'm fining you $500 for contempt of court," Judge Charles Hargrove announced, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction that made her blood boil. "That religious symbol has no place in my courtroom." The gallery fell silent. Dozens of witnesses exchanged shocked glances as the judge continued, his words dripping with disdain. "We don't need displays of religious fanaticism in these proceedings," Hargrove added, eyeing the cross around her neck with obvious distaste. "The cross doesn't belong here." Karoline's fingers instinctively reached for the silver pendant, a gift from her grandmother on her confirmation day. Her eyes, sharp as flint, locked with the judge's. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The veteran, political communicator knew exactly when silence carried more power than words. She had been sent to this courtroom on President Trump's orders, tasked with observing a lawsuit involving a group of Christians banned from public prayer. Instead, she had become the story. As the court adjourned, reporters began to circle, sensing blood in the water. Karoline brushed past them, her steps measured and purposeful despite the rage building inside her. Once outside the imposing marble columns of the D.C. District Court, she pulled out her phone and made a single call. "Rachel? It's Karoline Leavitt. I need you. Hargrove just fined me for wearing a cross in his courtroom. Called me a fanatic in front of everyone." Her voice was steady, controlled. "We're going to sue him and the entire D.C. court system. Defamation and First Amendment violation." On the other end of the line, Rachel Harper, the notorious conservative lawyer nicknamed the Judge Hunter for her relentless pursuit of judicial overreach, went silent for a moment. "How much?" Rachel finally asked, her tone clinical. Karoline looked back at the courthouse, her resolve crystallizing into something cold and unbreakable. $800 million. 24 hours later, the federal court system was reeling from the shockwave of Karoline's lawsuit. As news of the astronomical sum broke across media platforms, the story transformed from a routine religious freedom dispute into a political supernova. In her White House office, Karoline's eyes blazed with determination as she watched the headlines proliferate across her computer screen. The silver cross around her neck gleamed under the office lights, a reminder of the battle she had just ignited. Judge Charles Hargrove's words, "fanatic, dangerous spokesperson," still echoed in her mind, fueling her resolve. She didn't just want to win, she wanted him to pay dearly. Rachel Harper strode into the room, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression razor-sharp. The lawyer's reputation as the Judge Hunter wasn't accidental. She had made a career of targeting judicial overreach, particularly against conservatives. "Hargrove isn't just targeting you, Karoline," Rachel said, placing her briefcase on the desk with a decisive thud. "He's a pawn of the liberal elite trying to weaken Trump through you." Karoline nodded, already sensing the larger game at play. "So, what's our strategy?" Rachel pulled out a folder and laid out several documents. "We charge Hargrove with intentional defamation while suing the D.C. court for enabling anti-religious bias, and we demand the federal court expedite the proceedings." Her eyes gleamed with predatory anticipation. "The damage to your reputation is urgent. They'll have to comply." Karoline felt her pulse quicken. She wanted Hargrove to feel the same. Pressure she had felt standing in that courtroom, the weight of public scrutiny bearing down on him. "Make it happen," she said, her voice steely with determination. Rachel was already typing on her phone. "Filing now. We'll have a response within hours." Just as predicted, within 24 hours, the federal court agreed to expedite the proceedings, ordering Hargrove to provide all related documents within a punishing 48-hour deadline. The judicial system, usually plodding and deliberate, had been jolted into action by the sheer audacity of Karoline's demand and the explosive potential of the case. Karoline didn't wait for the legal wheels to turn. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. Jake Torres, it's Karoline. I need you to make Judge on Trial go viral. Jake, a social media strategist who had worked on Trump's 2024 campaign, responded with the enthusiasm of a digital battlefield. Commander, I'll coordinate with our network of TikTokers and YouTubers. We'll push the courtroom audio onto X within hours. Make it explosive, Karoline instructed. I want everyone in America to hear Hargrove calling me a fanatic for wearing a cross. By nightfall, the hashtag had surged past 50,000 mentions. A viral video featuring footage of Karoline standing at the defendant's podium, her voice resolute and unwavering, had been shared tens of thousands of times. The caption, "Hargrove thinks he's above the law, but Karoline will show him justice," resonated across political divides, transforming a courtroom incident into a national conversation about religious freedom. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit office, in the D.C. courthouse, Judge Charles Hargrove sat hunched behind his desk, the blue light from his computer screen illuminating his increasingly panicked expression. News of the $800 million lawsuit flooded television screens nationwide, and his email inbox was overflowing with press inquiries and, more disturbingly, hate mail from religious conservatives. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the messages, the reality of his situation beginning to sink in. What he had dismissed as a routine exercise of judicial authority had erupted into a national spectacle, with him cast as the villain. "This is just a young girl's stunt," he muttered to himself, but his voice lacked conviction. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Ellen? It's Charles. Have you seen the news?" Judge Ellen Carver was a longtime ally, her silver hair and cold gaze familiar fixtures in D.C.'s judicial circles. "I'm watching it now," she replied, her voice low and cautious. "What does she have against you, Charles?" Hargrove ran a hand over his face. "She's Trump's press secretary. She was there observing a case about prayer bans, and I fined her for wearing a religious symbol. It's standard procedure in my courtroom." "You called her a fanatic?" Carver's tone sharpened. "In front of witnesses? I may have been frustrated. She's been giving hostile press briefings about the judiciary for months." Carver went silent for a moment. "Calm down, Charles. I'll put pressure on the witnesses. She can't win without evidence." Hargrove nodded reflexively, though Carver couldn't see him. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he considered the mountain of documentation he would need to provide within the court-ordered 48-hour window. Somewhere in his files were years of notes on religious symbol restrictions, notes that, in the current political climate, might not appear as neutral as he'd once believed. In the sleek modern offices of the White House Communications Department, Karoline was reviewing talking points for an upcoming press briefing when her private email pinged with a new message. "From anonymous@protonmail.com," she read aloud, her interest immediately piqued by the encrypted email service. The message was brief. "I saw Hargrove and Carver's emails. Thought you should know. Ethan Brooks, IT staff, D.C. Court." Attached was a PDF file. Karoline's heart pounded as she opened it, revealing a chain of emails between Hargrove and Judge Ellen Carver. Her eyes widened as she scanned the exchanges. The judges weren't just colleagues. They were conspirators, explicitly discussing how to teach Karoline a lesson and send a message to Trump. One line in particular made her blood boil. "Target her cross. It'll throw the conservatives into chaos." This wasn't just judicial overreach. This was calculated political targeting. Karoline immediately forwarded the email to Rachel Harper, then to Jake Torres with a simple command. "Go public. Now." Within hours, Fox News ran the headline, "D.C. Judge Conspires to Smear White House Press. Secretary." The Judge on Trial hashtag exploded, surpassing 100,000 mentions, with ex-users commenting, "Hargrove's done. Karoline's a legend." Hargrove, watching the news from his home, felt the floor collapse beneath him. He frantically opened his laptop, trying to delete emails from the court's server, only to receive an ominous message. "System has saved copies." In the corner of the IT office, Ethan Brooks smiled discreetly, having just sent another tip, this time to Linda Martinez, an investigator with the D.C. Judicial Council. Linda, a veteran with 20 years of experience, immediately assembled her investigative team. "If Hargrove deletes evidence, he's violating federal law," she said, her voice firm and determined. Meanwhile, the cracks in Hargrove's professional facade began to widen. Miss Thompson, the court clerk who had witnessed years of his behavior, secretly photocopied her notebook, preparing to hand it over to Karoline. James Wilson, a court officer, whispered to a colleague, "Hargrove was wrong. Leavitt's doing the right thing." The tide was turning, and Karoline knew it. As Rachel Harper walked into her office later that day, placing a thick stack of documents on the table, her announcement sent a thrill of anticipation through Karoline. "The court just ordered a search of Hargrove's office," Rachel said, unable to hide her satisfaction. "We're about to get more evidence." Karoline nodded, her hand unconsciously touching the silver cross at her neck. The symbol Hargrove had tried to silence was now the emblem of her counterattack. Linda Martinez stood in the D.C. District Court's archive room, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across her stern face. With 2 decades of investigative experience, she knew the leaked emails revealing Judge Hargrove and Ellen Carver's plot against Karoline Leavitt were just the beginning. Her hand glided over dusty file shelves, stopping at a locked iron box labeled Internal Records. "Hargrove. Open it," Linda ordered her assistant, her voice low but commanding. As the box was unlocked, Linda's suspicions were confirmed. Inside lay Hargrove's black file, a thick dossier documenting over 200 cases of fines imposed on religious symbols in his courtroom over the past 5 years. An astonishing 80% of these targeted Christians. A handwritten note by Hargrove particularly caught her attention. "Keep the courtroom clean of fanaticism." Linda frowned, passing the dossier to her analysis team. This wasn't just bias. It was a systematic campaign against religious expression, particularly Christian symbols. As her team continued combing through Hargrove's records, Linda called James Wilson, the court officer who had witnessed Hargrove's behavior firsthand. Speaking in a low voice from a courthouse hallway, Wilson confirmed Linda's findings. "I counted 25 cases last year alone. Crosses, prayer pins. He fined them at double the rate of other violations." Linda jotted notes quickly, sensing the web of injustice unraveling before her. This went beyond Karoline Leavitt's individual case. It was a pattern of religious discrimination that had gone unchecked for years. Back at the White House, Karoline received an email from Linda with a scanned copy of the black file. As she read through each documented case, her anger flared. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about dozens, perhaps hundreds, of Americans whose religious expression had been punished by a biased judge. She immediately called Jake. "Post it all on social media platforms. The public needs to know who Hargrove really is." Within 30 minutes, Judge on Trial surpassed 300,000 mentions. Images of the dossier pages spread like wildfire across social platforms. One particularly viral post read, "Hargrove finds crosses but lets vulgar shirts slide. He's got to go." That evening, Karoline appeared on Newsmax, her voice steel-edged and uncompromising. "Hargrove isn't a judge. He's an oppressor of faith, and I'll expose him for what he is." As viewership numbers soared, the hashtag continued to gain momentum, eventually trending globally. Hargrove, watching from his dark apartment, grew increasingly pale as the story unfolded. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. The Judicial Council had called an emergency meeting to address the mounting evidence against him. He opened an email from Linda Martinez. "Provide an explanation for these findings within 24 hours. His hands shook as he tried calling Judge Carver, but the call went straight to voicemail. He scrolled through his social media feed, seeing mocking posts with captions like, "Hargrove, start packing. She's just a girl," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. But deep down, he knew he was losing control of the narrative and possibly his career. In desperation, he dialed an unlisted number. "I need to get out of this," he whispered to the person on the other end, a fixer known for helping powerful figures disappear when scandal struck. Linda Martinez's investigation was gaining momentum. Her team had uncovered yet another bombshell: emails between Hargrove and Senator Daniel Clean, a prominent anti-Trump liberal figure. Ethan Brooks, proving himself an invaluable whistleblower, forwarded these communications to Linda with a note. Hargrove was taking orders from Senator Clean. In one particularly damning exchange, Clean had written to Hargrove, "Target Leavitt, discredit her, and Trump will falter." Linda immediately forwarded this information to Karoline with a note. "This is the spark you need." As Karoline read the email, her lips pressed into a thin line of determination. This wasn't just judicial misconduct, it was a political conspiracy reaching into the halls of Congress. She called Rachel Harper. "We've got Hargrove and Clean. Push the lawsuit harder." Rachel, sitting in her law office, gave a cold smile. They don't know who they've just messed with. Jake Torres, coordinating from the media headquarters, pushed the Clean email onto X with the caption, "Hargrove is a puppet of the liberal elite." The Newsmax interview went viral, with comments flooding in. "Karoline is tearing the system apart." As public outrage intensified, crowds began gathering outside the D.C. courthouse, holding signs reading, "Justice for Faith." The chants grew louder, reaching Hargrove's apartment several blocks away. Through his window, he could hear their voices calling for his resignation. He drew the curtains with trembling hands, his heart pounding in his chest. A message from the fixer appeared on his phone. "Plane ready. Switzerland. Tomorrow." Hargrove nodded to himself, knowing he had run out of options. He was not just losing power, he was losing everything. The following morning, Karoline Leavitt stood before a mirror in the White House press room, adjusting her navy blazer. The silver cross gleamed against her blouse, no longer just a personal symbol of faith, but a beacon of her fight against judicial overreach. The television screens behind her showed live footage of the growing crowds outside the D.C. District Court, their signs demanding "Justice for Faith" waving in the morning breeze. Rachel Harper entered the room, holding a fresh stack of documents. "Linda just sent more evidence," she announced triumphantly. Hargrove contacted Clean through an encrypted app, but Ethan recovered the messages. Karoline skimmed the printout, her eyes narrowing at Hargrove's words. "Leavitt is a threat. We must silence her." She handed the documents to Jake Torres. "Make this a blockbuster," she instructed. Jake nodded eagerly, immediately contacting his network of digital influencers. Within hours, the encrypted messages were transformed into a viral video with dramatic music and flashing text. Hargrove conspired against Karoline. Who is he working for? As the video gained traction online, Karoline prepared for what would be the most important press conference of her career. She didn't just want to win her $800 million lawsuit. She wanted to expose the systemic bias that had allowed judges like Hargrove to suppress religious expression with impunity. Under the blazing flashbulbs of dozens of cameras, Karoline stepped to the podium, her voice resonating with conviction. "Charles Hargrove didn't just find me for my faith," she began, her gaze steady and unflinching. "He's a puppet of the liberal elite, targeting me to hurt President Trump and, by extension, people of faith across this nation." The court just ordered a search of Hargrove's office, Rachel said, unable to hide her satisfaction. "We're about to get more evidence." She held up the printout of the Hargrove Clean messages, cameras zooming in to capture the damning evidence. "This is proof that he conspired to defame me, and through me, millions of Americans who simply want to express their faith without fear of punishment." The press room erupted with questions, but Karoline remained calm and focused, citing the evidence found in Hargrove's black file and Thompson's notebook. She detailed case after case of religious discrimination, painting a picture of systematic bias that had gone unchecked for years. As the press conference concluded, social media exploded with reactions. One post that quickly gained traction read, "Karoline just dropped a nuclear bomb on Hargrove." The press conference video hit 1 million views in just 2 hours. Outside the D.C. District Court, the crowd had grown to hundreds, their chants echoing through the streets of Washington. "Hargrove resign!" Banners depicting crosses and the words, "Justice for Karoline," waved above the throng. A mother held up a photo of her son, once fined by Hargrove for wearing a prayer pin, shouting, "Leavitt speaks for us!" Fox News and Newsmax broadcast live from the scene, calling Karoline a torch of justice. CNN and MSNBC pushed back, labeling her a political agitator, exploiting religious sentiments for political gain. Karoline countered on Newsmax that evening, her voice sharp with indignation. "They call me an agitator? I'm just demanding the justice that Hargrove has trampled for years." The public rallied behind her, with social media users declaring, "Karoline 1, liberal media 0. In his darkened apartment, Hargrove turned on the television only to see Karoline's face filling the screen, her words cutting through his last defenses. He quickly shut it off, his hands trembling uncontrollably. His phone continued to flood with messages. Colleagues distancing themselves, friends expressing shock, and strangers hurling abuse. He opened his door to find a letter from his wife. "Charles, I can't go on. I'm gone." Even his son, a young lawyer with aspirations for the bench, had publicly denounced him, posting on X, "I'm ashamed of my father." Hargrove slumped into a chair, his mind reeling from the rapid disintegration of his life. He scrolled through social media, seeing mocking memes of himself, including one particularly popular image of him in a clown hat captioned, "Hargrove, the hypocrite judge." He called his fixer again, his voice breaking with desperation. "Isn't the plane ready? I can't take this anymore." The fixer's reply was curt but reassuring. "Tomorrow morning. Switzerland. Stay quiet." As night fell over Washington, Hargrove began packing, stuffing documents and a few personal items into a suitcase. He looked around his apartment one last time. The sense of power he had once wielded, now nothing more than a bitter memory. The next morning, as Hargrove was preparing to leave, he heard patrol cars approaching his building. Linda Martinez's investigative team had arrived with a search warrant, authorized by the very judicial system he had once been a part of. He drew the curtains, his heart pounding in his chest. A message from Judge Carver appeared on his phone. "Charles, they have everything. I can't help anymore." He threw his phone across the room, screaming in frustration, "She's destroyed me!" With shaking hands, he finished packing his suitcase, stuffing in the last of his important documents. The fixer called again, his voice urgent. "Plane's ready. Don't get caught." Hargrove nodded, knowing he had no choice but to flee. He took one last look at his apartment, the scene of late-night strategy calls with Carver and Clean, the place where he had plotted to silence Karoline Leavitt, and, by extension, the religious voices he had deemed fanatical. Now it was all crumbling around him. As he slipped out through a service entrance, avoiding the investigators at his front door, Linda Martinez was receiving a report from her search team. Hargrove left behind a laptop with undeleted data confirming his encrypted app communications with Clean. She immediately called Karoline. "We have more messages, and it looks like Hargrove's about to flee the country." Karoline stood by a window in the White House, looking out at the Washington skyline. "Let him run," she said, her voice cold with determination. "Justice will catch up to him eventually." She touched her silver cross, feeling the strength of the countless Americans who now stood behind her, not just as supporters of a political figure, but as believers in the fundamental right to religious expression. As news of Hargrove's flight spread through Washington's power circles, the impact of Karoline's counterattack became increasingly clear. She had not just defended herself against a $500 fine, she had exposed a web of bias that extended from the judiciary to Congress. In her office that evening, surrounded by her team, Karoline watched as social media continued to explode with support for her cause. The hashtag, You Judge on Trial, had evolved into Yos Justice for Faith, with Americans across the country sharing their own stories of religious discrimination. Rachel Harper raised a glass of sparkling water in a toast to the beginning of true accountability in our courts. Jake Torres checked his analytics dashboard, his eyes wide with amazement. "The engagement numbers are off the charts. You've started something that's bigger than just this case." Karoline nodded, a quiet satisfaction replacing the anger that had fueled her for days. This was never just about me or Hargrove. It was about standing up for principles that matter. Her phone pinged with a notification. Hargrove had been spotted boarding a private jet bound for Geneva. The man who had sought to silence her faith was now fleeing the country, his reputation in tatters, his career ended. What's next? Jake asked, sensing that this victory was just the opening salvo in a larger battle. Carolina looked at the cross around her neck, the symbol that had started it all. "Now, we make sure this never happens again, to anyone. We push for reforms that protect religious expression in every courtroom in America." As night fell over Washington, Karoline Leavitt had transformed from a target of judicial overreach into a champion for religious freedom. The $800 million lawsuit that had seemed audacious just days earlier now appeared to be the catalyst for a movement that would reshape the relationship between faith and justice in America. And somewhere over the Atlantic, fleeing the consequences of his actions, Judge Charles Hargrove finally understood the power of the religious symbol he had tried to silence, and the determination of the woman who wore it. "The court just ordered a search of Hargrove's office," Rachel said, unable to hide her satisfaction. "We're about to get more evidence.